Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into the really fascinating afterword of Dr. Jose Joel Miguiza C. Eggco's book, The Death of Utopia. You know, throughout the main text, Dr. Eggco uses Karl Popper's philosophy to absolutely dismantle Maoist ideology in the Philippines. But what we're looking at today is a brilliant, honestly kind of risky, intellectual maneuver right at the very end of the book. We're going to see what actually happens when an author puts his own core arguments on trial to see if they can survive the ultimate pressure test. So what happens when you subject a philosophical weapon to an ultimate stress test? Let's dive into this intellectual mystery. Dr. Eggco literally spends his whole book using Karl Popper's philosophy as a weapon to dissect and destroy radical ideology. But then, in a massive twist of intellectual honesty, he deliberately throws Popper to his harshest academic critics in a final trial by fire. Why do this? Well, because any argument that rests too comfortably on a single thinker risks becoming insulated, right? It risks becoming the exact same kind of dogma it's trying to critique. To prove his conclusion is rock solid, he has to test the very weapon that got him there.
Part 1. The Unfinished Refutation, Defining the Stakes.
To really grasp the stakes of this stress test, we first need to define the specific enemy the book is going after. And at its core, that enemy is historicism. According to the text, historicism is the dangerous engine behind radical ideologies. It's basically this belief that history is a pre-written script with a totally inevitable, guaranteed endpoint. Dr. Eggco explains that once an ideology convinces its followers that their victory is literally their destiny, well, everything else becomes negotiable. Because victory is seen as absolutely inevitable, any human cost, no matter how brutal, gets justified as just a necessary step toward that perfect future.
To attack this, the author uses Karl Popper's ultimate weapon, falsification. The rule here is super simple. A true, scientific theory must expose its throat to reality. It has to risk being proven wrong. The book argues that true science actively seeks out and admits its mistakes, while utopian movements, they demand blind obedience and, tragically, human blood just to hide their errors. Falsification is all about having the courage to say, hey, I might be wrong.
Part 2. Testing the ultimate weapon, the four critics. Now, to really pressure test Popper's weapon, Dr. Eggco brings in some heavyweight philosophers. One brilliantly specific critique comes from Imre Lakatos. He pointed out that, in the real world, ideologies rarely just fail cleanly and disappear when they're proven wrong. Instead, as the book notes, they become what Lakatos calls degenerating programs. Think of it like a really laggy, buggy computer system that just absorbs its own errors. It constantly patches itself with new excuses as the real world just totally leaves it behind. It doesn't predict anything anymore, it just tries to survive. You can actually see this idea perfectly captured here, represented visually as a fallen communist statue surrounded by decay. The source material explores exactly how a degenerating ideology functions in practice. When the promised inevitable revolution fails to happen for, say, over 50 years, the theory doesn't just pack up and admit defeat. No way. It just builds elaborate excuses, blaming traitors, inventing foreign conspiracies, or just redefining its own failures as a historic necessity. It mutates into this completely unfalsifiable dogma, entirely disconnected from reality.
Part 3. Four critics, one verdict.
Let's look at the ultimate breakdown here. The insights from these four philosophers essentially build a coffin for historicism. Thomas Kuhn argues that progress is discontinuous and unpredictable, meaning the whole idea of a predictable historical destiny just fails. Then, as we just saw, Lakatos shows how theories dissolve into degenerating excuses. Paul Feyerabend jumps in to argue there is no single absolute scientific method, which totally collapses any ideology's claim to absolute authority. And finally, W.V. O'Quine showed that core beliefs just hide from facts in a massive web of assumptions, meaning absolute truth cannot be established by dogma. Put them all together, and they prove history just cannot follow a neat scientific law.
Now here is the great epistemological mystery of the afterword. We've just seen four massive critiques of Popper's exact method of falsification. So, if these critics successfully weaken Popper's framework, does that mean the Maoist concept of an inevitable historical destiny gets off the hook? Does the ideology of the closed society somehow survive this stress test?
The author argues a resounding no. And honestly, this is the brilliant plot twist of the afterword. Each insight complicates Popper, but none restores the central claim of historicism. These critiques actually destroy the underlying enemy of historicism even more thoroughly than Popper did alone.
Sure, they might complicate the specific rules for how science works, but they absolutely obliterate the idea that history has a predetermined script.
Just look at the combined weight of these ideas. If progress shifts unpredictably, if theories endlessly adapt just to hide their own failures, if no method has supreme absolute authority, and if core beliefs are literally just hiding from the facts, well, then the central claim of an inevitable historical destiny shatters completely. There is no endpoint. The prophecy is dead.
Part 4. Destiny versus contingency.
This brings us right to the final verdict of the book, replacing a deadly illusion with a seriously liberating reality. Dr. Eco vividly contrasts these two worldviews. On one side, we have destiny, the violent script that insists on fixed laws, demands unquestioning obedience, and ultimately requires human blood to force reality to match its prophecy. On the flip side, we have contingency, the reality of an open society. It's messy, it's unpredictable for sure, but it allows for freedom, for dissent, and most importantly, it allows us to correct our mistakes peacefully without piling bodies on top of them.
The author drops the mic with this profound realization. What remains is not destiny, but contingency. History is not a pre-written script. The future is entirely unwritten. And because it's unwritten, Dr. Eco concludes that no human being should ever be forced to die to fulfill an ideology's false prophecy. The ultimate stress test is complete, and human life is placed firmly, undeniably above ideological dogma.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought to really reflect on. If history has no inevitable destiny, and if no perfect utopian script is coming to save us, how does embracing our messy, unpredictable reality actually empower us to take responsibility and build a better society today? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating intellectual journey with me.